Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Reid toko ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara Aotearoa. I'm John Reid from the Water New Zealand Climate Change Group. Today we're going to review some of the issues that have been discussed at COP28. The main headlines are about the agreement to transition away from fossil fuels, which is voluntary, and it's a long way from the phase out fossil fuels language that many countries wanted to see, but it's a start. So in this podcast, we hope to dive a bit deeper into behind the scenes at COP28 and understand some of the issues that might affect Aotearoa New Zealand and our water industry. So as usual, I'm joined by my co-host Hannah Edmond and two fantastic guests. First is Amelia Linzey, who is CEO of Beca and has a background in policy and planning. Our second guest is Bapon Fakhruddin from the Green Climate Fund. Both Bapon and Amelia attended COP28 in Dubai. Kia ora, Hannah, Amelia, and Bapon.
Kia ora.
Thanks, John.
Kia ora, John. It's great to have you guys back in and talking to us. So we've seen the pre and what we were excited about. Now it's post, it's the download of what happened at COP28. What I'm really interested first off is what the main highlights were for you personally at COP28. And maybe Amelia, you could start us off.
Look, the highlights for me, I talked a bit about the scale before I went, just thinking about, 70,000 attendees, and I understand over 100,000 people working on COP and the delegation input that was going on. I think the thing that really struck me about the scale, and I used it to, I quoted the movie, everything, everywhere, all of the time. It really was that on the ground. It was seeing the universality, I suppose, of different sectors looking at what climate change, what decarbonisation, and what adaptation and resilience looks like everywhere. I went to seminars on oceans, went to seminars on biodiversity. I heard presentations from the fashion industry, weirdly, because it was in between two when I was trying not to walk 25,000 steps a day. So I went to one on that. And I went to one very deliberately on storytelling and psychology of how do we help communities think about climate action and climate response. But what I took from it was just the impressive change that we have seen. And there are strengths and weaknesses to it, I know, but of the sheer turnout of people being involved in COP and the thinking about how this affects every facet of our social, cultural, environmental, and economic activity as humans in every economy. And so I think that was the real takeaway for me was just both the overwhelming challenge that creates, but also the optimism that you have private, public, NGO sectors, everybody in all of those different industries thinking about what does it mean for us, what's our role, how do we work. So that was my big takeaway and big sort of observation that I was mindful of in scale before I left, but that's perhaps a reflection looking back, having been there. How was it different? And that's perhaps my summary of that.
Amazing. I mean, it sounds exciting and also slightly potentially overwhelming with the amount of things that are going on in that space.
Yeah, definitely.
And Bapon, what was your main highlight from the COP28?
Thank you so much. I fully concur with Amelia. I think that was the scale was actually quite fascinating actually in Dubai this time. However, actually, I was quite pleased to be attend this time for COP and also, putting a new hat as a Green Climate Fund, one of the largest climate financing in the world, where we actually able to participate more than 500 events for us as well as for a partner. But myself, I was actually attended in a week 35 event. But the best takeaway for me actually to see actually that some of the discussion that we made in pre-COP, most of it actually came out as a success, such as creation of loss and damage funding, commitment by the Dubai itself, as well as UAE government itself, as well as other countries, the pledging on largest financing into the climate change action.
We talked a little bit before, Bapon, about the global stock take, and we're sort of hoping to get a bit more clarity. Do you think is that clarity now about where we need to focus, particularly in emissions and for emissions within New Zealand and those targets?
I think that's really a good point for us actually to learn what the GGTA will do, discuss and provide some guidance. There are still many uncertainty in how actually we do these things or how we actually do really this transitioning away. But I think that's mostly depends on how the country need to be performed by themselves. And one of the greatest discussion that if we really want to transitioning away from the fossil fuels need to be start from the local, which is from the country itself. And most of the country has been agreed on that, which is quite good learning from New Zealand actually how we set up our target and what mechanism we actually put in place in this particular area.
So the headline agreement that we've all been seeing in the papers is obviously the message that's really about the transition away from fossil fuels. And I know, Amelia, in our previous conversation, you were talking about how you were looking forward to the fast tracking around clean energy. But were the outcomes what you were expecting?
Look, while I think there's a very difficult balance in terms of the role of fossil fuels, and we're ending up in a position of transition away rather than the phase out aspiration is disappointing in some ways when we look at the scale of the change that we need to do. But at the same time, positive sides to this, we did see a high ambition coalition signed and an energy package that really looks for how we can commit to staying within 1.5 degrees temperature limit. And New Zealand was a signatory to that. So I think that's a positive side of this. The goal and a reaffirmation of the goal. And the president for COP28 also reiterated the aspiration and importance of his call for that unity to sustain that goal. And so all of those things are important. The how we get there was still a topic of discussion and debate. And I think inevitably some compromise. I think, again, a little bit as Bapon answered, though, the point is that these topics are in the conversation. We are now, in fact, when you think about it, even having a conversation about debating between phase out and phase down and ending with transition away from is a big significant shift. Again, perhaps not the shift all of us aspired to, but a shift in the right direction still. So it's the challenge for me was the sense of are we going to be able to do this in the time that we have, rather than the sentiment of there is commitment to get there is important. And what that is important was recognised and seemed to be widely accepted. So I think that was the positive, and the positive side of the softening, I suppose, to transition away, in my mind.
Yeah, that's really good to hear that there's still progress, even though it felt like we didn't quite get to where we hoped.
Yeah. Well, I would say, John, I was very influenced by the speaker, and I talked about that I went to the psychologist about how if we focus on what we're not doing, it's very hard for people to see what they can do to contribute to it. If we focus on what we can do, it gives people a much clearer positive energy about the things that they can pick up and do. So I suppose I took that message and that seminar very much to heart in the storytelling, and I think it's a really important one for us to reflect on. So that's probably reflected in my sentiment of what I've taken from it, because I think focusing on the action we can take and focusing on how we keep sight of those goals, how interim steps are taking us there, and what we can keep positively doing to push for more change, I think is the drive I've walked away personally thinking, and we really need to hold on to this side of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good lesson for everyone involved in climate change. It's small steps and things that you can control, whether that's in your company, within your business, within your the projects you work on, whatever level that you can influence. And I think that's something we all need to hold on to. Bapon, I could just ask a little bit about the water pavilion, because you spoke about that when we met last time. Was that a success?
I think as a water community, what we all actually try to achieve this time, it is a success in a sense that we're able to give a clear message that water is a climate change problem. And if we really wants to solve the climate change or create climate action, we need to be look at water management as a key. And I think that has been reflected quite significantly in various document and as well as recognized by the UAE presidency itself. One of the things maybe I just like to add before I jump into the water is in addition to Amelia is that the GST now actually gives us a quite significant opportunity how we can actually enhance our national determinant contribution so that it would be more ambitious and better suited for our individual context. And you maybe know that that has been already decided that overall the new NDC need to be finalized by COP28, which is in a 2 years time. And if it actually comes to our region, actually this is a good way to showcase that how a proper framework or systemic approach could be enhanced into climate action, which is looking at as highly ambitious NDC and how the NDC actually translate into understanding our risk, and then how that risk actually translate to better understand what would be the adaptation option and how you prioritize those adaptation options for your country context. So now jumping into water, and you maybe also saw that in the GGD framework, the transformative milestone, which actually clearly provides the world with specific measurable target and guidable for adaptation planning and finance, and water has been actually come out as a first instruction that it is the critical and how actually we need to be look at the water solution into that particular area. We also able to share various innovation into the water related project, and also how we can actually encourage or bring actually private sector in to working together with the public sector, especially on the water conservation and water distribution area, which is actually quite weak in most of the countries, looking at the non-revenue water losses, which on an average in a developing country is a 30 to 65% loss. So some of the examples that actually provided, such as South Africa and many other countries, demonstrate that how the country able to actually bring together working with private sector in a blended financing option. And looking at those aspects, I thought actually how some of those lessons or some of those projects could be replicated into the New Zealand context to better understand our water availability, demand management, and as well as making sure that our water security and integrated water management are in place.
Yeah, I'm sure that'd be interesting for some of our Water New Zealand listeners, trying to sort of translate that to some of our own situation.
Amelia, while you were over in Dubai, you obviously had your eyes open and you were watching what was going on in the New Zealand context as well. How was New Zealand represented at COP28, and how was the contribution received?
We were part of, and part of the reason that that Beca chose to go was because we were part of the business delegation supporting the New Zealand contingent over there. It was a very difficult time for us, to be fair, with the changing government just as we were going through. In fact, some roles not filled as COP started. So it was really good to see Simon Watts get up there. I think that was a commitment that he was making to the importance of the conversation and the importance of his role as incoming minister. I did hear him speak a couple of times, both presenting to the parties, and also as a separate delegation discussion where he spoke to us about the focus and the commitment that they were taking. And I think he demonstrated a good understanding of where he was going and what he wanted us to be doing, and also a fast learning curve of picking up the strong work. We had others like James Shaw in the delegation, and that was, I think, very useful in terms of maintaining some of the continuity of conversations. I think there were two highlights for me for the New Zealand, and one low light, of course. Two highlights were the support that we gave in sponsorship with the Pacific Pavilion with Australia. And I think that strengthened our voice there. We are an important, both it's our neighbourliness and our South Pacific commitment, and our South Pacific neighbours do have a much greater and, in fact, existential crisis in some cases in terms of what they're looking for with climate change. So I think it was very important and notable for us to be there, and the Pacific voice at COP was quite strong, and it was good that we were able to support that. And the other was the one I mentioned before about us being a signatory to that high ambition coalition. And I think that, again, because of that Pacific nation's vulnerability to climate change, is a very important message for us in the global stage to be committing to that. Of course, the third thing was perhaps the less positive message, and that was the Fossil of the Day award for the revoking of the ban of offshore oil and gas drilling that we were successfully awarded. And I think that is an important thing for us to think about when we're in those environments. We are on the global stage and we do send global messages. And I think that was perhaps a local commitment that had quite a big impact in terms of our brand and reputation in places like COP, in the decarbonisation and the adaptation and resilience discussions that are going on globally. Some of those moves, it's really important that we think about the message that we're sending internationally when we do that sort of thing. So they were my observations of our role, and it wasn't a big voice, but I think there were some areas of high impact that we had.
I had a couple of times also meeting with our ex-minister, Mr. Shaw. And also, I mean, one of the Nature Environment Day, I think the New Zealand WWF actually showcased some of our Mataranga Maori and our indigenous knowledges, which was actually fascinating. The room was actually full to learn actually how we actually care our nature and how we actually cultivate the culture in a very, very unique way, and how the global community could learn that from us. I think we need to be a little bit careful and also promote some of the indigenous knowledge that we have, how we could be taking a leadership role into the global community.
That's a really good point, Bapon. I met with Marama Royal from Ngāti Whātua, though she was there representing the iwi chairs for all of Aotearoa, and she had that was probably the session you saw. I didn't see it, but she was very both engaged in the presentation that she'd had, but also the importance that Māori have in New Zealand about the opportunity that they can have to share that with other Indigenous communities that are at different stages in their voice and their important role in the climate change discussion.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It'd be a wonderful thing for New Zealand to be able to sort of give to the world and some of the other Indigenous communities if we can sort of translate that more widely.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
The agriculture and food production also made the headlines. I think there was a declaration that adaptation really is urgently needed there, really for food security. And that included statements about water management within agriculture. I don't know if you can tell us anything about that and reflect on what it might mean for New Zealand.
I think one of the things I found this COP especially on agriculture and food security, or even also other sectors such as like education, you maybe saw that how we brought together a more systemic and programmatic approach, because the amount of demand the countries have due to this climate change and then the impact that are happening into the sector, no financing or no donor or multi-development bank would be able to support that in a ad hoc basis, country by country. And some of the declaration that has been country come up with, and also as a GCF is part of it, to share that how we can actually create a programmatic approach to ensure a systematic vulnerability reduction. You maybe saw that a big partnership has been announced under the Agra in Africa to enhancing the agriculture and food security, as well as for education, early warning systems, and other sector as well. So that was one of the big takeaway for me to showcase that how we can actually support to the global community to ensuring the sectoral enhancement and sectoral vulnerability reduction.
So Bapon, from the water pavilion, and I guess from across the board of everything that you were seeing at COP28, what do you think the key takeaways for the New Zealand water sector are that we can really kind of bring home and start talking about?
I think one of the great takeaway that the water community able to provide message and as well as learn from others that there is a need to be an unitedness. Still, the water governance is weak in every particular country because of our silos working culture. So how we can actually work together in a more transboundary or multi-disciplinary approach using engaging with other partners, other sector is quite important because things are very emerging due to climate change. And if you really want to address these emerging issues, we need to be very transboundary as well as transdisciplinary and having a co-creation and co-culture kind of environment to work together in hand. Often there is a biggest gap between the NDC, which belongs to the Minister of Finance or Minister of Environment, and the water security sector or water sector. Even within the water sector, sometimes the distribution goes to the more like private and public, or public sector, completely different management systems. So those are the key lessons that we learned, that how we can work in a collaborative environment. But then what does it actually means to us in New Zealand context? When we try to reflect that, we are not actually far behind or quite mature than others what the global community are stressing on the water security. We are still on looking at a little bit of very silos on our 3 water security, 3 water management. And I think there has been a lot of discussion now going on, actually, the reforms and how that reforms ensure a collaboration and collaborative environment for us to work together. And also to understand how we try to value water as an asset class, so that actually it's not actually just free goods. We need to be respectful to water users. We need to be conservative. We need to be efficient and effective into the water management. So these are some of the things that actually as a community, as a New Zealander, we need to be understand.
Thanks, Bapon. I mean, I found the conversation really quite fascinating. My takeaways are around the fact that there is progress and it's definitely in the right direction, but there's big question marks about whether it's enough and what we need to do to pick that pace up. But really, water is at the centre of all of the climate change conversations, and it's impacted by and impacts what we're doing, but also that despite some communities being more or less impacted, the only way we can do this, and the real takeaway from what Amelia was saying before is, we're all in this together, and there are so many people there who are doing things from all sorts of different parts of the world that's actually quite encouraging to hear all of that, isn't it?
Yeah, excellent. Absolutely agree.
So, kia ora, thank you very much, Amelia and Bapon, for joining Hannah and myself today. It was really great to talk to you about COP28. So interesting to see what that might mean for our future here in New Zealand. So this concludes our last podcast for 2023. So thank you so much for listening to this or any others in the series. We'll be back next year with a wider focus, talking to people about areas of topical interest to the New Zealand water industry.